a rapper's not signing a deal with a label and they're snatching up both copyrights. That's not normal. So why the does an unsigned rapper feel like snatching both copyrights from me as the producer?
Well, they don't know that there's two copyrights. That's what, I mean, we've been doing this podcast for over 100 episodes.
But if the expectation is that the artist is going to own it, then the producer maybe isn't being fully compensated.
Peace, everyone. What's going down? It's the Music Entrepreneur Club podcast powered by BeatStars. We're live twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our free music business mentorship program. I believe it's one of its kind. Today on episode 109, we're bringing back a special guest. We've had him on before. But today, this is perfect timing because I've been wanting to address this again on the podcast, and he coincidentally reached out to me because he was working on, I guess, conveying the same kind of clarification to producers and rappers and songwriters and so forth about a pretty contentious topic that just never seems to die. Mark Tavern, how are you feeling?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you for coming on.
Always good to have Mark on the show. Mark obviously knows a lot, and it's a break from our voices. So we appreciate it, Mark.
Well, and it's also a different perspective. And I like that you haven't always coddled the producer community per se. Neither has Dame, but you've gone hard on producers. And for me, you know, I appreciate that this is going to be more of a technical explanation than one of, you know, a creator's emotional attachment to their work. So I'm going to be sensitive because I make beats and I make music. And for me, so let me just, in a nutshell, talk about what the topic is. I feel like every week there's always an incident in which I have to explain why a beat maker is considered a co-writer, and it gets tiring, especially because it's this ongoing conversation. I mean, we write the music, even if we're not physically writing musical notes on a sheet. We're not actually notating, but we are maybe playing keys or programming in a piano roll. The same way if a songwriter never writes their lyrics down and just walks right into the booth and delivers it, they still wrote the lyrics to that song. They just wrote them in their heads. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I feel like that is just the easiest way to explain it. We're writers, but it is a myth that a lot of people believe that you're not a writer and therefore you don't own the underlying composition copyright to a track unless you're writing lyrics, which is crazy to think because it's like if you release instrumental music or orchestral music where there aren't any vocals or lyrics, then what? Those royalties just don't get paid to anybody? Come on, we got to use our common sense. But in spite of that, I still hit a brick wall with certain recording artists, singers, rappers, and there's this very small subsection of the recording artist population that feels like they should still own 100% of a song, including the beat. That means that they own both the master copyright and the underlying composition copyright, and thereby just pushing out whoever made the beat completely out of any ownership to a song, out of any claim to any royalties generated from that song. Basically, that's it. You created it, but you can never eat off of this again. I don't think they would like having that done to them, but this is me kind of bringing the emotions into it. So I want to defer to Mark when it comes to this topic a little to put it in a different perspective.
Thanks. So this is such, for me, an interesting thing because it really brings out the changes that I've seen in the music business during my whole career. I think it also goes to this idea that, you know, there's a title that you have, the performing artist, the producer, the songwriter, and those titles have a long-standing history, but they don't really reflect how songs are written and recorded and produced now. And and yet we still cling to these ideas. And I think that kind of creates what you were just talking about, this idea that if you are the beat maker, that means you're only doing one thing, and that only entitles you to a portion of the compensation. And so, I try with what I write, and I try, when I teach, to get people to think about the other perspectives. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that means that, I'm stepping on people, because I say it's so interesting, because it can be like, it can end up being so sort of didactic as well, even if I'm trying to explain, like, oh, you did this, or you did that. And I just think that this is an interesting thing, and it comes out of how the songwriting process has evolved. You think about Tin Pan Alley and the roots of American popular music, and the idea that the songwriter was, a lonely soul figure, and met with a publisher at the end of every day and had to give them a song. And because the business was based around the songs at the time, the performers didn't really matter, because they're selling sheet music, and the performers only mattered insofar as they were marketing opportunity. And that's evolved now into a songwriting process where the songwriter is only one part of it. Everyone is contributing. And I wouldn't want someone who considers themselves a beat maker to feel like they're being left out. I think that that's what you were getting at, that like they see their role as in one light, and that thinking may prevent them from getting compensated appropriately.
No, that's a good point, because that's another one of those conversations that just won't die, which is this whole beat maker versus producer debate, which I don't even like to go into, because, as you said, a lot of people play different roles, and especially nowadays with the way music is created, those roles aren't really clear. They're fluid. You know what I mean? Like, I might just make a beat one day, or I might produce a song another day, or I might make a beat and then write harmonies or program harmonies to a hook that someone else wrote. So now I'm handling vocal production. I might rearrange someone's beat and contribute to it. So now I'm a programmer / arranger. You know what I mean? So all of these roles, as you said, contribute to the creation of the song. And for me, I think it's the way I look at it is just, we're all collaborating. We're all co-writers. So I'm not going to nitpick over what you did. I'm just going to say, let's talk about splits and split evenly, or something where everyone's happy. My issue is, in spite of how much, one of my main issues, and I don't know how to solve this, is when I have these conversations with people, they have absolutely no idea how any of this stuff works. And I really don't blame them, because it's convoluted. Like you said, the whole sheet music era, it is still defining how music business runs today, which doesn't make any sense. Back when mechanical licenses had to do with player pianos, like, we don't have those anymore. So here we are, still kind of stuck in those terms and in the way that business ran back then. And it doesn't help us as the people that are behind a DAW. And it actually makes things way more confusing, and it puts the power in the hands of the publishers or the entities that have the pull in the music business already, not so much the creatives, as you said. And that's just kind of, unfortunately, the tradition. So having that conversation is hard enough. When I'm trying to explain to someone why I deserve a piece of the underlying composition, and they don't even know what an underlying composition is, and they don't know that a master is different, and they don't know that streaming pays more on the master, and they're not affiliated with a PRO. That's the part where it's just like, I can't penetrate that first layer to get to the real conversation. How am I ever going to convince someone that doesn't know what the hell is going on in the music business that I'm a co-writer, and that you should register me for, 25, 30, 40, 50% of this underlying composition?
That education process is what's so hard. And as you said, like the lack of transparency and the complexity in the industry plays right into that. And it's interesting, I think about the changes that take place, and this is the big one that I don't know is if we acknowledge enough, that in the world of a traditional record deal, this conversation would have been handled by your record label, because they understood and they controlled, and so they were the ones to be able to say, here's, they were able to be the ones who confirmed what you were just describing, that yes, like you came in and you wrote the lyrics to this piece, maybe you contributed to the bridge in a different way, you arranged, each of these musical roles, the label could have been there to confirm. And now in a DIY, in a self-releasing world where the label isn't there, and in fact, the label may not even be there during the recording process now. Like they may not. A lot of what you're just describing is happening before the label even gets involved. The actual, if we try and separate beat making from production for a moment, that process, you're making those beats every day, regardless of whether or not there's a label or performing artist involved. You don't get further in terms of closer to release until you have that product, and you can say, hey, I've got this beat, or hey, I wrote these lyrics, and try and have a collaboration with someone else. And so there isn't an opportunity for some third party to come in and say, okay, tell me what you did. Okay, this is how this relates to copyright law. This is how what you did relates to industry practice, and help you sort that out. And that's why I've written a bunch of pieces over the past couple of months that are trying to get at that the educational component of that, so that a creator, whether they're a performing artist, a songwriter, a beat maker, a producer, or even a musician, who's hired kind of on a one-off basis to come in, they all have an understanding of how those titles affect what they do, and ultimately how what they do affects how they get compensated.
Before DIY was so prevalent, when you just had more major record label stuff, like they developed industry standards for what splits should be, right? Like producers get 50%, 3% producer royalty. I think we need a independent standard, but we also need to understand like how that standard was generated, so that if the variables are a little bit different, we know how to adjust percentages higher or lower accordingly. Like it would be ideal if we just said, hey, it's normal in the independent space for the producer to get 50% of the publishing, but also, 15, 20, 25, 30% of, the master royalties as well. But then understand like how we came up with that. Because then if there's a big name producer that's negotiating for a higher percentage, it makes sense because he or she is really making that album move. Or if it's a more green producer, maybe the percentage is a little lower. I just think we need like those industry standards are kind of needed, so we can have like a baseline conversation and then adjust up and down depending on, different variables that might be in play.
And I feel like that's a high level conversation. Whereas what you will often say, Dame, is you'll comment on the zero barrier of entry for the music business. So especially now, and I don't know if I can speak on this, Mark, but I know that this is something that you're writing about or considering writing about now, with how easy and accessible it is to make music, which I absolutely love. As a beat maker, you can make your first 5 beats today and get them on BeatStars tomorrow for free. And then someone can license those beats from you that same day and suddenly you're in the music business, you might not understand any of it. So we're at the point, we're often at point zero, where neither party can really understand, or neither party really does understand, producers included. I put a lot of this on the producers, the beat makers. They don't understand this. And so I had to leave a lot of producer groups on Facebook because it was us who were perpetuating these myths that actually hurt us. You know, the biggest one is, well, if you lease a beat, you don't get any kind of ownership, any kind of royalties. I'm like, that doesn't even make any type of sense, especially when you consider the meaning of the word lease or the meaning of the word license. None of that, no. So even at that point, I think now, Mark, you're starting to target artists, whether they make beats, whether they write music, at that level, not at the level of a person who's signed, not at a level of a person who's already gone through enough to educate themselves and understand these copyright differences and intellectual property laws and splits and all that. You're targeting the person who maybe is just doing this for the first time in their lives. And that's a very different conversation, right?
Yes, it is. And that's why I'm going back, the pieces that I wrote, talked about how a record is actually made up of two copyrights, that you have to think about it in that way, that there's a songwriter, there's a musical work that is as you said, the underlying composition, and that is a separate part of the record from the sound recording or the master. And yes, traditionally, the songwriters divide up the ownership of the musical work, that composition, and traditionally the label and or the performing artist own, divide up the ownership in that sound recording. So yes, like we're starting from there. And if you understand that, then you can begin to see how your role can impact your composition. And then you have to go another level deeper and say, okay, how is this being used? And this is the thing I think that is such a significant change because of DIY, that traditionally, songwriter wrote song, and then the A&R found that song, put it with an artist, and hired a producer to actually oversee the recording process. The A&R at the beginning of the record business, the A&R was also the producer. It was their job not just to find the talent, combine them with a songwriter, but also hire the musicians, hire an arranger, book a studio, and oversee everything. Over time, that role became separate, and that's where the producer role comes from. But with that is this idea that the label owns that master recording, and that may not be true anymore. It may be the performer. But I think, Dame, what you were getting toward, and this is why I had reached out before to ask you this question, is like, at what point, and this is the significant change, at what point does the relative clout, or marketing ability of that producer or beat maker actually begin to eclipse the performing artist in this case? And should they not receive a piece of the ownership of the master recording that would have traditionally been owned by a label, but in a DIY situation is now more than likely owned by the artist? And how do you have that conversation with a performing artist where you can get that, where you can say, look, like, to make this beat, I had to expend this amount of time, this amount of energy, or maybe I had to pay certain recording costs, and I should be able to get those. I should be able to get those back if you, as the artist, are exploiting this record. But if the expectation is that the artist is going to own it, then the producer maybe isn't being fully compensated. I don't know. This is an interesting kind of dilemma for producers now that I've become increasingly sensitive to, because I come from, major label background where it's like we own everything, and the producer royalty comes out of the artist royalty, and it's all kind of siloed. And I think now, having watched this change take place, I sort of see like, it's totally possible for this artist who, as you said, like leased that beat today, doesn't have any records out at all, has chosen something by a much bigger name producer, and that differential probably should be accounted for somehow in terms of how that producer is being compensated.
Yeah, I mean, I think the marketing is huge. So especially in today's time when you're competing with so many other songs. So whoever has the ability to really move the song, get the song out there, I think is owed compensate or deserves to have the conversation around additional compensation, because that's essentially taking part of what the label would have done, and the label would have owned the master, right? The label would have pushed the song out there, marketed it. But now that you have different people with platforms, and it could be a producer these days, like that's a conversation that I think is it's within your right to have, because I think it makes a lot of sense in today's time, the way music's being made. So yeah, you were about to say something, Payne? My bad.
Great timing, because this conversation about marketing is what comes up time and time again when I'm having a conversation advocating for producers. And I'm talking about hardline stances, like a rapper who says, if I license a beat from you, if I'm paying that $29.99, I own everything. You're not getting shit from me ever again because I paid. That stance is justified by them saying, I'm the one investing in promoting the song. I'm the one that had to pay the distributor to drop it on Spotify. I'm the one that had to pay for playlisting. I'm the one that had to pay to push this song. Therefore, the producer doesn't get shit because the producer didn't pay for any of that. And so why would the producer get royalties?
But you keep having this confrontation with people because they're just not understanding what Mark laid out, 5-10 minutes ago, the difference in copyrights. They don't understand that. That's why you just keep running.
But I don't think it matters. I think it comes to, and this is why I had Mark on, because now I'm getting emotional about this, because I do believe that emotion is what's tied up in this conversation. Artists are always bitching about bad deals that they sign with labels. The label has too much control. The label's taking too much out of their pockets. The label's doing this. The label's doing that. The label does take ownership of the master. A rapper's not signing a deal with a label and they're snatching up both copyrights. That's not normal. So why the fuck does a DIY independent unsigned rapper feel like snatching both copyrights from me as the producer?
Well, they don't know that there's two copyrights. That's what we've been doing this podcast for over 100 episodes like that. And you always, instead of like educating, like you respond with a joke, or you assume that they already know that. Like they continuously don't know because they're only signed up with their distributor. So whether it's BeatStars or DistroKid, whatever, that's the only money they've ever seen. Like they don't even know to sign up with anything else. Those are the type of artists that you keep that's unfair. That they don't know that there's two different copyrights.
But we talk. I do talk about that, and what I do when I hit a brick wall with somebody, I will. Number one, I've gotten to the point with recording artists in these dialogues where they'll acknowledge that there are two copyrights. Maybe they're not understanding it, but they're claiming that they do. And then ultimately they're saying, I put the money up, so I own everything.
But here's the bigger piece, or maybe equally as big piece of why they are confused. It's the way producers sell their beats, royalty free. So they hear that and they're like, oh shit, I got it. I'm good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of on you and your messaging. So now you're going to circle back and say you need a percentage of something, and they're looking at your website and they're like, hold on, royalty free. They don't know about two different copyrights. So
wait,
again,
but to me, royalty free does mean royalty free. So I don't know who's doing that, but let's have a
but or it says unlimited. Words like unlimited or things like that. You can sell it unlimited. They just need to go back to the basics. They need to replay what Mark just said, like I said 7 minutes ago. Like two different copyrights. So when you lease a beat, it doesn't give the producer. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong. If they lease a beat and they put it on Spotify, the money that they get on the master side, they don't share with the producers. You're only saying that the producer is still entitled to 50% of the publishing, right?
Well, I don't know what each individual agreement says, so I can't really say one way or another.
So now you're telling an artist they have to actually like read through every individual producer's agreement. And then, I mean,
I know that's a lot.
but they're not.
Yeah.
But they're not going to do that. Like they're just not going to do that. So
I know that.
So here's what I would do as a producer if you want to stop running into these issues. You should advertise exactly what it is when they purchase the beat. Don't make them shift through a contract. Right on your site, it should say, hey, I'm owed 10% of your Spotify royalties and 50% of the publishing. They should be more transparent. Don't bake it into a contract that they're not going to read. They should, but they're not. Like this is
why thank you both for being on here and going hard on producers, because I think we do need that.
I think that, so going back to like the terminology for a moment, there's this, like, what is a beat maker, right? Like, is a beat maker a songwriter? Is a beat maker a producer? Are they both? Like, what is that? And the reason why I want to bring that up, and I know that this can be a very touchy subject. The reason why I want to bring that up is because it's interesting how this sort of split between the music and the lyrics, I think, is causing some of this. That in a kind of retail environment, which I think is amazing, because up until a point where a beat could be sold retail, that revenue stream for a producer just didn't exist. The only revenue stream that you had was, as a producer, was to get an artist client and produce their record and then negotiate with them for a producer royalty, presuming under those circumstances that you didn't write the song or that you didn't co-write the song. But now you don't have to create those artist relationships, and those are hard fought, long-term relationships. Now you don't have to. You can create the beat and you can put it on BeatStars and you can sell it retail. That is an amazing, just such an amazing change in the way the music business works, in the way that producers can be compensated. But I wonder if like the beat maker name has now kind of pigeonholed things to such an extent that the performing artist is coming to this, and saying like, well, I write the lyrics because, I'm the rapper. That's what I do. And, and I think hip hop specifically has such a tradition of how the rapper must also be the lyricist, right? Like it doesn't work otherwise. Like traditionally, you don't rap somebody else's song. You write your own lyrics. You might rap over their beat. So those two things are separate. And so I wonder, you talk about the messaging, that the artist is coming to that thinking like, this is all tied up with a nice little bow, and I just add my lyrics to it and it's mine. When in fact they're ignoring the fact that 50% of the composition goes to whoever created that beat, because that's all of the underlying music. And yeah, that there was a recording session that took place in which a portion of that master was created. And so I do think there needs to be a conversation with between the artist and the producer. Do I always think that the artist should own 100% of that master recording? That's a great question. It's a tough question because they're the one, if they're paying the money for the marketing, if they're the one distributing it, if it's their name on it, if the licensing is happening through them, then yeah, they should own 100% of it because they don't want to have to go check with anybody else if they get a licensing opportunity. They don't want to, and you check the box. You talk about how nobody reads contract. You check the box when you upload that, and it says you own it, and that you're providing certain rights for the streaming service to exploit it on your behalf. You may be giving rights to someone to license it. The digitization of these contracts has kind of changed things. Like that transfer, that assignment is automatic, and so we just need to think about. I think we need to think about this. We need to educate people about how these changes have come about and how they reflect or how they've changed how producers and artists interact.
In other words, it's a mess.
It is. And, there's something I find fascinating about it, that it's always been a mess. It has always been a mess. And that mess has changed over time. I'm putting together a class in the fall that's talking about distribution and streaming and digital royalties. And we're gonna look at kind of the history of the record business and how people got paid and how the change to digital changed that, and then ultimately how the change to streaming is changing that. And why is it that Payne, you said earlier, the recording artist gets 80% of the revenue generated from streaming after the streaming service takes their piece, and the songwriter only gets 20%. Like, why is that? What is the historical reason for that? And there is one. Basically, it comes down to the idea that the record companies traditionally, historically, had to pay for the recordings. Recording is much more expensive than songwriting. Record companies had to take a bigger risk, and so they were always able to argue for a bigger cut. But is the marketplace that exists now different enough that we need to examine that and take a look at how that split is? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. It used to, when I worked in the majors, like, it made total sense. But now the changes that have taken place in the market make me question that and say, like, why is it that the songwriter's only getting that? And part of it extends to 1909, when the first copyright law was created and the mechanical royalty was introduced as part of the law, and it was 2 cents split between the publisher and the songwriter. It didn't change until in the 70s. So the songwriter compensation has historically lagged performing artist compensation. And to what extent is that the result of the fact that the songwriter is in the background? Like, literally, what was it, 2 years ago, for the first time that Spotify was putting songwriting credits on the platform.
Yeah, I actually don't really think. I don't think it's a mess. Like, it's probably more complicated than it has to be. But as long as you understand how to have the conversation, even with the 1 Week Notice project, Payne, I told you what it was going to be, and whenever we get this damn project out, like, that's what the splits are going to be. Like, as long as you know how to have the conversation, you should clearly communicate that with whoever you're working with, all the different collaborators, and just make sure that when the music comes out, whatever was agreed upon, that's how the splits happen. Like, it doesn't have to be a mess. You can easily have these conversations as long as you understand what conversation to have. So, and once you have it, and it's not, once you take the time, even if you don't know anything and you just consume Mark's content, listen to what he's saying, maybe check a few other resources, it's not physics. Like, it's not rocket science. Like, okay, I got it. 2 different copyrights. This is how things are split. Let's have these conversations. Like, that's what it's about. Communication, understanding what conversation to have. And then, sometimes those conversations are tough because it goes back to what I was talking about before, Payne, when I said, everybody kind of just naturally overvalues their contribution to anything, like to a team, to a song, to like, so the first estimates that get thrown out, when you tally them up, it's going to be over 100%. So that's when the conversation needs to be like, okay, there's only 100% to split here. So let's figure out how to try to make everybody happy for what they think they're bringing to the table. And that's where the conversations might get a little tense. But if you know what conversation to have, hopefully it's not a mess, and it's just, it's a lot easier. So.
Sorry,
I would
Mark.
say,
my bad. Go ahead.
I would say that deals with the publishing aspect of this. But going back to what Payne was saying before about that producer who was like, I bought the beat for $29.95 and now I own it because of, they ticked off, you ticked off a bunch of reasons why. I think that there's an opening there for the conversation to take place in which, the producer or the provider of that beat, whatever they call themselves, says, okay, but I know, your name's going to be on, the top of the record, and you're going to put this record out using your distribution channel. But I did all of the production in connection with the music, and maybe I didn't produce your vocal. Maybe I didn't produce the session in which that vocal got tracked. Maybe I didn't oversee the mixing, kind of roles that are associated with like that traditional producer. But, as I said, you put money into it. There was studio time that was spent. Maybe it's your own studio time, so it's difficult to itemize. But maybe you should, and say, like, this took me, 3 hours to make, and and if I build that out, what would that cost? And so $29.95 gets you the lease, but we need to have another conversation about the ownership in the actual master, because I in creating that beat created a part of that master.
Yeah. And I think the other, in addition to a lack of education in terms of why, of reasons why we keep having these same conversations, is because a lot of people have never seen a penny from their music. Like, they don't receive that. Most music that gets put on Spotify doesn't make money. So they don't even maybe they don't even see a reason to understand the different copyrights. They're like, shit, I've never seen any money from my music. So that has never incentivized me to figure this out. I forget what the stat was, but most of the music that gets uploaded to DistroKid, to Spotify, doesn't get any plays, or very few, to not generate, more than $1. So,
so a lot of us are fighting over 0% of like the whole publishing conversation. I'll get into not arguments, but like back and forth with an artist that says, no, you're not getting any underlying composition. And I'll ask them, which PRO are you affiliated with? And they'll be like, I don't even know what that is. So it's like, you're not even collecting the money that you're trying to fight with me for, because you don't even know how to get it. So stuff like that made me want to argue a lot less, because I'm like, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, let's say one of these beats goes viral, or one of these songs that I produce goes viral, and the artist is being an asshole and trying to cut me out of it. I know what to do. I'll be fine. It's just that you don't want to have to get into one of those heated battles just to get a fair split. Like, I'm flexible. I'm willing to work, but it goes down. It comes down to the golden rule, in my opinion. Even if you don't know about the business, you got to ask yourself, hey, as a rapper, as a singer, as a songwriter, would I want a label coming in saying, hey, we gave you an advance, we own everything forever, and you and your family can never eat off this again? No, hell no, you wouldn't want that. So treat others like you would want to be treated. That's just just my opinion. Mark, where is that class that you're talking about?
The streaming class is at the University of New Haven. There's a new class that I'm working on. It's super interesting because I hope it to be partly a history of how basically the history of how we've gotten to this place in the record business. It starts with Tin Pan Alley, and it talks about, I mean, at the earliest stages, you think about Thomas Edison inventing the cylinder phonograph. He didn't do that because he was interested in making records. He did that because he wanted to create a better office place. He wanted to be able to have an answering machine for the telegraph. He wanted to have a dictation machine. And it was only when that business failed on him that he was like, wait, people want to listen to performers. At that time you had to buy a ticket and go to the opera or go to see a vaudeville show. But people were willing to listen to a cylinder record, and that's where the record business begins. It had nothing to do with a desire to record art, except or to the extent that it made Edison, it allowed Edison to sell his cylinder machine. But I hope to be able to take that through streaming and really take a look at what we just talked about. Why is it that songwriter compensation lags performing artist compensation? Why is the producer only getting 3% royalty? Like, where does that come from? And are there ways that we can talk about the streaming ecosystem that maybe can change things and provide for some kind of equitable remuneration for not just performing artists, and the streaming rates that they're getting, but how that money is then split up amongst producers and songwriters.
Dame, I have a request. Can we devote next podcast to the T-Pain rant? Because I think it is something that we'll have a lot to say about.
Yeah, that's fine. I know we're running up on an hour almost anyway. So yeah, we could definitely do that next week. Okay,
cool. So you heard it. Stay tuned for that. I think Dame's going to go off in a similar fashion to T-Pain, actually. And have you seen T-Pain now? T-Pain's now in the Lipton commercials. Cousin T, because it's T, iced tea. You know what I mean?
Nah, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. So shout out to T-Pain. He's still getting his endorsements and his brand partnerships going on for himself, as he should. He's an icon. Mark, once again, thank you so much. At Mark Tavern, that's how people follow you, right?
Yes, everywhere. It's great to be here.
Sorry, say it again. I keep cutting you off. There's a delay or something. Oh, now it's just awkward.
He just said it was great to be here.
Okay, and then I'm cutting him off as he's saying that. I really create a healthy environment for dialogue here. Once again, Mark, thank you. Shout out to everyone tuning in. And if you're watching this podcast, chances are you're watching it on a weekday, and we are live twice every single week for free on beatstars.live, Mondays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just check out beatstars.live or text MEC to what number, Dame?
Just text MEC to 844-206-7800. You'll get a text right before we go live. No excuses.
That's super convenient. I'm going to send out my text in an hour or so. So if you're not on the list, get on the list. Once again, thank you for tuning in. Peace.
Peace. Thanks.